all, and welcome to week 4 of the course. First off, congratulations. Well done for submitting your first assignment. The first assignment actually is always the hardest, and it is a little bit of a milestone. It's the hardest one to get motivated to start and do and get your head around. So good on you, and congratulations for having it done and dusted and completed and submitted, so you can take a big deep sigh of relief knowing that one's you can mark that one off the list. So just a little bit about week 4. So week 4 is actually the first week of module 2 in the course. So in module 2, we start looking at language and literacy and the Australian early childhood education setting, and we start unpacking the key documentation that guides practice and pedagogy within the Australian early childhood education setting. So these being the Australian curriculum and the early years learning framework. So we will look at those documents in a little bit more detail and unpack those a little bit, and also try and connect them to some of the things that we've been learning about so far in the course. So in terms of the theoretical perspectives that we have been studying. So essentially we ask you to try and debunk the curriculum and the Australian early years framework, and then debunk the theories, and then connect those two together and come up with some ideas and practices for future pedagogy. So you'll find that this week's activities are actually split up into 3 different activities. So the first activity asks you to concentrate solely on either the Australian curriculum or the early years learning framework, and look at those in a little bit more detail, from a critical perspective, and start thinking about their importance and their application within the early childhood Australian community, and how those guide literacy and language practices and pedagogies for the early childhood education community. Then we ask you, so part 2 asks you to connect that understanding that you've developed of those key documents, and connect those to the theoretical perspectives that we've been looking at so far in this course. So that's the ideas of Piaget and whatnot. So try and connect those ideas, those theoretical ideas, to the curriculum or the early years learning framework, and see what you can establish and what ideas you can essentially come to conclusions with. And the third activity just asks you to review your ideas and the ideas of everybody else, and sort of bring it all together. So they're the 3 activities for this week. As I mentioned, it's a really good idea to try and keep up with those activities. I know it's very difficult with children and work and other subjects and whatnot, but you'll find the discussion board really is a place for you to explore your concepts and practices, and really develop your articulations and your understandings of those concepts and practices, which ultimately really set you up for completing the assignments, and also laying the framework and the foundations for future study in this course. So I encourage you as much as you can to try and get to those activities. If you find you've missed a week or you've fallen behind somewhere, that's perfectly fine. You can pop in at any time into the discussion board and just catch up, and pop into any of the weeks and complete the activities then, or post a reflection. It's fluid, So yeah, okay, that's all. You know where to contact me if you have any questions, and I should have your assignments back within a couple of weeks. Okay, thanks. Bye. Hi all, and congratulations for submitting your first assignment. Well done. You've actually reached quite a big milestone, as the first assignment's always the hardest to get through and submit. So give yourselves a big pat on the back, and take a big sigh of relief, because that's done and dusted for the moment. Now in week 4 we start module 2. So module 2 is all about language and literacy in Australian early childhood education. So in this module, we really start unpacking the Australian early childhood education documentation of the Australian curriculum and the early years learning framework. And we start looking at those particularly in relation to some of the theoretical perspectives and ideas that we've studied so far. So week four and module 2 generally is quite important in terms of future practice and, bringing together that theory side with the practical side of education and literacy education in the early years. So this week's activities are broken into 3 different parts. So the first part asks you to unpack either the Australian curriculum or the early years learning framework and just think about your particular setting and that particular documentation and how that documentation guides and supports you in your role in your particular setting. The second activity asks you to think about, again, that documentation, whether it be the Australian curriculum or the early years learning framework, and link that to some of the theoretical perspectives that we've been learning about so far in the course. And the third activity just asks you to just review your ideas and other people's posts and just, bring it all together. Like I said, the discussion board activities are pivotal in terms of expressing and maintaining and developing your understandings of the key concepts that we look at and unpack in this course. So do try and do those activities as much as you can. I understand with life and assessments and other subjects and work and kids and whatnot, you can fall behind, and that's perfectly fine. If you have found that you've fallen behind in some of the previous weeks, please go back in and explore those weeks and, add in any comments that you feel. And yeah, excellent. All right, if you have any questions, you know how to contact me, and I look forward to reading your posts this week. Thanks. Bye.